The sun rose pale over the edge of the desert, washing the dry land in shades of gold and dust. The wind carried whispers of smoke from a distant campfire, fading into the silence of the endless horizon. A lone figure walked that road, a young Apache woman with a faded shawl drawn close around her thin shoulders, her bare feet bruised from miles of stone and heat. She carried nothing but a small satchel and a wooden spoon tied with a strip of leather, as if to remind herself she still had a purpose. Hunger gnawed at her belly, but pride held her spine straight. Her name had been forgotten by many, but she carried it quietly like a prayer. Before her stretched a ranch vast as the sky itself, fences running toward the hills, horses grazing in the distance, smoke curling from a chimney. A windmill creaked lazily beside the barn, and on the porch, watching her with wary stillness, stood the rancher. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, his shirt sleeves rolled, hat casting shadow across his sun-browned face. People in the nearby town called him the Giant of Silver Creek. He lived alone since his parents passed, running more land than most men could dream of, yet with no laughter echoing across it. The woman hesitated near the gate, fingers brushing the rough wood. Her heart beat fast, not from fear but from the weight of asking. She had spent days turned away from every door. In this last place, she would ask one more time. The rancher didn't move, but his gaze met hers with something unreadable, not suspicion exactly, but a quiet measure. She stepped forward. Her voice trembled once, then steadied. "I need a roof over my head," she said softly, "and you need someone to cook." The wind carried her words between them, then fell still. He didn't answer right away. His eyes lingered on her worn clothes, the dust on her skin, the glint of determination behind her exhaustion. Finally, he nodded once, the motion slow, deliberate. Theirs were behind the kitchen. "Supper's at 6, he said, and turned back toward the porch. She followed the scent of hay and smoke through the yard. Chickens scattered near her feet. The kitchen was larger than any room she'd slept in for months. It smelled of emptiness, cold pans, dry bread, coffee long gone bitter. She lit the stove and washed her hands in the basin. By the time he came in, the air was warm with stew, beans, and the faint sweetness of cornbread. He ate quietly at the table, his movements careful, almost reverent. The woman didn't sit. She moved around the stove, cleaning, her hair falling loose down her back. He studied her, not as a man studies a woman, but as one who has found something rare and uncertain. The firelight painted her face with gold and shadow. She reminded him of the land, harsh, enduring, unexpectedly beautiful. When he spoke, his voice was low. "You cook like someone who's been hungry." Her hands paused over the dishcloth. "I cook like someone who still might be." He said nothing more, but when she turned to refill his cup, he reached to steady the pot, and their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away quickly enough to pretend it hadn't mattered. After supper, she stood at the doorway, unsure if she'd earned another night. He motioned toward a small room near the barn. "There's a cot in there. It leaks when it rains." She smiled faintly. "Then I'll pray for clear skies." He watched her step out into the moonlight, her silhouette framed against the pale silver of the plains. When the door closed, he felt the strange warmth of her presence linger, as though the house itself had drawn breath after years of silence. Days passed with quiet rhythm. She rose before dawn, lighting the stove, sweeping the porch, whispering to the horses as she passed. He worked the fields and returned each noon to find his meals waiting, simple but full of care. Neither spoke much, but in their silences something began to root, a fragile trust born from shared solitude. One evening, while she scrubbed the floorboards, he paused at the doorway. "You got a name?" She looked up, her eyes dark and still. "Naira." He repeated it softly, as if testing its sound against the air. "Naira," he said again, and something gentle shifted in his voice. She smiled, a flicker of warmth passing between them. It was the first time he had seen her smile. The next morning, he rode out to the valley to mend a fence line. Storm clouds gathered in the distance, turning the horizon to iron. By dusk, he hadn't returned. Naira waited, pacing the porch, eyes tracing the road through the rain. When at last his horse appeared, dark with mud, she ran to meet him. He swung down, limping slightly, water dripping from his hat. "Fence held," he said simply, though his sleeve was torn and blood marked his arm. Without a word, she led him inside, pulled a clean cloth from the drawer, and began to wash the wound. He tried to protest, but her hands were steady. The scent of sage filled the air. Her voice was quiet as she worked. "You shouldn't ride alone in weather like this." He studied her face, the concentration, the frown between her brows, and felt something tighten in his chest. "You sound like you've had to worry before." "I have." Her answer hung in the space between them. She didn't explain, and he didn't ask. When she tied the bandage, their eyes met for a heartbeat too long. Then she stepped back, her breath trembling slightly. That night, rain beat against the roof. He couldn't sleep. From his room, he heard her humming softly in the dark, an old tune from a language he didn't understand. It wove through the sound of rain like a prayer. He found himself smiling for no reason at all. Morning came clear and golden again. Naira stood outside, hanging washed linens in the breeze. The land shimmered fresh and clean. The rancher walked out to the fence, coffee in hand, and watched her. She looked up once and caught his gaze. For a moment, the space between them felt fragile, suspended. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he turned toward the barn, muttering something about the horses. She watched him go, the faintest curve of amusement touching her lips. That evening, as the sun bled red behind the hills, Naira found a folded blanket left neatly outside her door. On top of it rested a small tin cup filled with wildflowers, yellow, stubborn, growing from desert soil. She lifted it gently, her eyes shining in the last light of day. From his porch, the rancher watched her through the fading glow, unaware that the gesture had already crossed a line he could never uncross. Inside the quiet house, two hearts, once strangers, had begun to shift toward the same flame, and though neither dared speak it, both felt the same fragile thought taking root. Perhaps what began as survival was already becoming something far more dangerous. Morning settled over the ranch, with a hush that felt almost sacred. Dew clung to the fence posts, the smell of wet hay and horses mingling with the faint smoke from the kitchen stove. Naira stood over the fire, stirring a pot of oats, while sunlight caught the edge of her cheek. The rancher watched from the doorway, hat in hand, as if uncertain whether to step inside. He had never grown used to someone else filling the quiet. For years, he'd lived in the company of dust and wind, his voice used only for giving orders to horses, or the hired men, who seldom stayed. Yet now, each dawn came softened by her presence, each meal warmed by her careful hands. When she noticed him, her lips curved slightly. "You'll catch cold standing there," she murmured. Her voice had grown bolder, though still gentle. He stepped in, pulling up a chair. "Cold's the least of my worries these days." She poured him coffee, dark and steaming. The way her fingers moved, precise, unhurried, reminded him of someone who had learned patience through pain. He took a sip, studying her quietly. "You keep this up, I might start thinking you like it here." Her eyes flickered toward the window, where a hawk circled above the plain. "I do," she said after a moment. "But liking something doesn't mean it's yours to keep." He frowned but didn't press her. Some truths didn't need to be pulled apart. Days blended into one another, marked by rhythm. Horses to feed, bread to knead, fences to mend. She hummed when she worked, low and tuneless, a sound that stitched peace into the house's bones. The rancher found himself lingering near her more often, offering to help where he didn't need to. She pretended not to notice, though sometimes her eyes softened when she caught him, carrying what she could have lifted herself. The town began to notice too. When he rode in for supplies, men at the saloon made quiet remarks. "You're keeping company with one of them Apache girls, aren't you?" one said, a smirk curling his mouth. The rancher didn't answer. He simply met the man's eyes until the laughter dried in his throat. But the words followed him home, like dust clinging to boots. That night, he found Naira sitting by the corral, combing her hair under the fading light. "They talk," he said, voice low. "They always will," she replied. Her tone was steady, though her hands slowed. It doesn't change what's true here. What is true? He asked before he could stop himself. She turned to him, eyes reflecting the last of the sun. That I'm grateful for a roof. That you've shown me kindness. That's all I need to know. But when she smiled, he saw the loneliness still hiding behind it. He realized then that gratitude was a thin shield against the world's cruelty. As summer deepened, storms began to build on the horizon. One afternoon, thunder rumbled across the hills. Naira ran from the barn, her dress damp with rain, laughter spilling from her lips as she chased a stray hen. The sight of her, hair wet, eyes alive, struck him harder than any lightning. For the first time, he understood what it meant to want something beyond reason. That evening, the storm trapped them inside. Rain hammered the roof. The fire cast flickering light across the room, and for a long while, neither spoke. When she finally broke the silence, her voice was soft. You don't talk much about yourself. Not much to tell, he said. There's always something. He hesitated, then set his mug down. I built this place with my father. Buried him out back by the cottonwood tree when the fever took him. Buried my mother 2 winters later. Since then, it's been me and the wind. She listened without pity, only understanding. The wind's a poor companion. It was, he said quietly, until you started humming. A smile ghosted across her lips, but her eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. The fire snapped, and they sat in silence, the air between them thick with things neither dared name. Weeks passed, and their lives began to intertwine in ways both small and deep. She mended his shirts with neat stitches, though she never said she had. He began bringing her wildflowers from the valley, pretending they were for the table. The ranch seemed to breathe easier around them, as if grateful to feel alive again. One morning, a letter arrived from town. The rancher read it at the table, his jaw tightening. The railroad was expanding through Silver Creek. Strangers were coming, bringing law, noise, and new rules. They wanted his land, or part of it, for the tracks. He folded the letter slowly, eyes shadowed. Naira saw the worry flicker across his face. Bad news. They'll take the lower pasture, he said. Offer's fair, but it's the only place the wild horses still run. You could fight it. I could, he said. But men like me don't win against steel and money. She stood beside him, her hand resting on the table. Maybe not, but men like you build things worth more than they can measure. Her words lingered long after she left the room. Later that day, he found her outside with the horses. The wild stallion, the one no one could tame, stood still under her touch. The sight filled him with both awe and unease. He'll break your arm if you're not careful, he warned. He's just waiting for someone to trust, she murmured. He realized then that she might as well have been speaking of herself. The days grew heavy with heat and dust. The townsfolk's whisper spread faster than wildfire, that the rancher had lost his wits over an Apache woman, that she was using him, that she'd curse his land. He ignored it, but one evening when he rode into town, 2 men cornered him outside the store. She doesn't belong here, one sneered. You're bringing shame to this valley. The rancher's voice was steady. You don't get to decide who belongs. A punch landed hard, sending him to the dirt. He didn't fight back. He simply stood, wiped the blood from his lip, and looked the man in the eye until the coward turned away. When he returned home that night, Naira saw the bruise and said nothing. She only pressed a cool cloth against his cheek. People fear what they don't understand, she whispered. He caught her wrist, eyes dark. I don't fear you. She smiled faintly. Maybe you should. The next morning, he found her outside, staring toward the hills, where the sun broke through the fog. Something in her face had changed, quieter, resolved. When he asked what she was thinking, she said softly, That peace never lasts long for people like us. Before he could answer, a rider appeared in the distance, galloping fast, dust rising behind him. The rancher's brow furrowed as the figure drew closer, waving a telegram high in one hand. Naira felt a chill move through her chest, though she didn't know why. The rider reached the gate and shouted her name first, not his. And in that single breath, everything that had felt safe suddenly tilted toward danger. The rider's horse stopped in a spray of dust, chest heaving, eyes wide. He held out the telegram, his hand trembling from the long ride. The rancher took it, nodding his thanks, but the man's gaze stayed fixed on Naira, uncertain, almost fearful. Without a word, he turned and galloped back toward the horizon. The rancher unfolded the paper slowly. The words were short, stamped in cold. Apache raids near the valley. Suspect woman on your property may be connected. Silence stretched between them. The air felt too still, the sun too bright. Naira's face didn't change, but her hands clenched in her shawl. They think I had something to do with it, she said quietly. He looked at her, searching her eyes for any flicker of deceit. There was none, only pain, deep and familiar. I don't care what they think, he said. They'll come here, she whispered. And when they do, you'll lose everything for sheltering me. His jaw tightened. Then they can take the land. I won't hand you over. She turned away, staring toward the hills, where the smoke of far-off fires darkened the sky. You don't understand. They don't just take land, they take peace. You'll never live quiet again. He stepped closer, voice low but steady. I stopped living quiet the day you walked through that gate. For a moment, neither moved. The wind carried the faint scent of rain, the promise of another storm. Then Naira lifted her eyes to his. If I stay, someone will get hurt. Then let it be me, he said, and the truth in his voice shook her more than any threat. That night, the valley burned orange with lightning. The storm rolled in heavy and mean, wind tearing through the barn roofs, thunder splitting the silence. Naira stood by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. The rancher came to stand beside her. His sleeve brushed hers. You should rest, he murmured. I can't, she said. When I close my eyes, I see fire. He hesitated, then reached out, his rough hand finding hers. You're safe here. She turned to him, tears catching the flicker of the lamp. No one has ever said that to me and meant it. I mean it, he said. For the first time, she believed him. At dawn, the rain stopped, leaving the earth soaked and shining. A mist rose over the hills. They walked the pasture together, repairing the broken fence line. The horses moved restlessly, sensing change in the air. The world felt suspended between peace and danger. When she knelt to tie a wire, he caught sight of the mark on her wrist, a faint burn, old but jagged. She saw him looking and pulled her sleeve down. From before, she said softly. A soldier's wife didn't like me working in her kitchen. His voice hardened. People like that have no right calling themselves human. She smiled, small and sad. Hate comes easy when you've never gone hungry. Before he could answer, the sound of hooves echoed from the ridge. 3 riders appeared, men from town, rifles slung over their shoulders. They slowed near the gate, faces hard, rain-soaked hats dripping. One called out, "We need to talk." The rancher walked forward, Naira just behind him. "Talk then," he said. The man spat into the mud. "There's been trouble near the valley. Some settlers dead. You've got yourself a woman who fits the descriptions we've been given." The rancher's voice was calm but cold. "You'll do your talking from that side of the fence." "She could be a scout," another man said. "Maybe she brought them here." Naira's breath hitched, but she didn't step back. "I've been here every day," she said. "Cooking, cleaning, feeding your horses when you rode past. You saw me." The first man sneered. "I saw a savage trying to play house." Before he could blink, the rancher had his revolver drawn, aimed low but steady. "That's enough." Rain began again, light at first, then heavier. The men exchanged glances. One finally muttered, "You'll regret this," and turned his horse. The others followed, vanishing into the curtain of rain. The rancher lowered his gun. His hands trembled, not with fear, but fury. Naira stood silent beside him. When he looked at her, he saw both strength and sorrow carved into her expression. "They'll be back," she said. "Let them," he replied. "I won't let them take what's mine." "You can't fight the whole world," she said. He looked at her then, really looked, and said, "I don't need the whole world. I just need you." That night, the air was thick with the scent of wet earth and wood smoke. They sat near the hearth, the fire crackling low. She told him about her family for the first time. The sickness, the soldiers, the years of wandering. Her words came like rain, slow but unstoppable. He listened without interruption, every sentence carving deeper into his heart. When her voice faltered, he reached out and brushed a tear from her cheek. "You deserve better than what the world gave you." "So do you," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why we found each other." The silence that followed was soft, sacred. The firelight danced across their faces. When he finally leaned forward, their foreheads touched. No kiss, just stillness. A vow unspoken but understood. Morning broke clear and golden. The storm had passed. The valley smelled of rebirth. Naira stood at the edge of the field, hair loose, eyes bright. The rancher joined her, his hat in hand. "You thinking about leaving?" he asked. "I was," she said, "but I don't want to anymore." He took her hand, calloused fingers closing around hers. "Then don't." The days that followed were quiet. The town's anger cooled once the raids moved north. The men never returned. Slowly, life began to settle again. Naira planted herbs near the porch. The rancher built her a small kitchen garden, fenced with polished cedar. At night, laughter returned to the house, the kind that sounded like belonging. One evening, as the sun melted behind the hills, he led her to the cottonwood tree. A preacher waited there, the old widow from town standing beside him. No crowd, no grand words, just the open sky and the smell of earth. He looked at Naira, his voice rough with emotion. "You needed a roof," he said. "I needed a reason to stay home." She smiled through tears. "And now I need you." They married with pride, hands trembling, heart steady. When the vows were done, he slipped a ring made from his mother's silver chain onto her finger. The wind swept through the valley, carrying the scent of sage and rain. That night, lanterns glowed warm through the windows. The horses grazed peacefully beyond the fence. Naira stirred stew on the stove, humming her quiet tune. The rancher watched her, his chest full of something that felt larger than joy. Outside, the desert stretched wide and endless, no longer lonely. And in that stillness, a thought rose like a prayer. Some homes are not built from wood or stone, but from the courage it takes to love what the world tells you not to. As he stepped behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, she turned her face toward the window. Lightning flashed far off on the horizon, a reminder that peace, like love, must always be defended. And though they didn't yet know it, that flash marked the beginning of a story that would outlast them both.